All right, we're going to start at 3. It's in just about a minute and a half. So just wanted to let you know your sound's working and we are here. We'll start at 3. All right, good afternoon. This is Bonnie McFarland, and I'd like to welcome you to day 2 of our 22-23 LCAP workshop. Today, you're going to be hearing from a number of our LACO team, first from the LCAP state and federal programs team, and then from our business advisory services team. So that includes Adrienne Balcazar, Debbie Cano, Rachel Garcia, Jeannie Keat, Helen Choi, and Anita Lomeli from the LCAP unit, and Dio Bracchi, Belinda Martinez Hoyi from the Business Advisory Services Unit. And I'd also like to acknowledge the support of Jennifer Kirk, Financial Services Officer in that unit, for her support in developing this presentation. You're going to find a link to the slides in the chat, and that will also include any handouts that are provided. So all of that is at that link. And a recording of the meeting is also going to be posted on our web page at that link within 24 hours of this presentation being finished. So let's take a look at today's agenda. And today we're going to start by taking a deeper look at 3 key areas within the LCAP. Because state data has been limited for the past couple of years, we want to spend some time looking at metrics in the LCAP based on the current context. We're taking some time also to focus on goal analysis, because we really see that as an important leverage point in moving LEAs forward in the continuous improvement process. And we also want to continue to focus on the increased and improved services section, because we continue to see LEAs struggle with that requirement in the LCAP. So we wanted to take some time to take another look at that section. Our partners from Business Advisory Services will also take a deeper look at the action tables that they introduced in day 1, and they're also going to provide an overview of the budget overview for parents. And then finally, we're going to go over the approval and submission process, including an overview and update on the LCAP system. So that will be the last item on the agenda. We have a really full agenda today, and we apologize in advance if we go over our scheduled time. We're really working at not doing that, but if we do, we want to let you know that the last section is going to address the LCAP system, and it'll be particularly applicable to those of you who use the system for plan development. In addition, as I mentioned, the recording of the full presentation will be posted on our website. And as you know, everyone on this that's presenting today, plus the additional business advisory services consultants, are all available to support you through this process. So we're here to help you. So it's on the next slide is just our protocol for questions, because we don't have a lot of time, and because your questions are often very detailed, we will provide a Q&A if there are any questions. Last time we didn't have any, so we didn't put a Q&A out, but if there are today, we'll definitely get back to you. We also post that Q&A on our website and email it to all our participants and everyone on our listserv. So, and finally, There are some resources available for you. All these are links. They're organized by LACO resources, and those include a timeline document, the summary of legal requirements, recording to the PowerPoint from day one. So the last presentation we did, the first one for this year, and the LCAP user guide. All of those are under the LACO resources. And then also CDE resources include the LCAP template instructions, the action table, the budget overview, and the link to the CDE LCAP webinars. So all of that's for you on that slide. So let's get started and take just with a bit of a recap. And we just want to briefly recap what happened at the last meeting and provide a couple updates and reminders before we dig in. So the next slide looks at our day one, and that day was focused on the what of the LCAP. We reviewed each section of the template, including a review of the action tables from our business advisory services colleagues. And then in addition, we discussed the local indicators. So we discussed all the parts of the LCAP, the parts of the submission. But today we're going to focus more on the how to address the requirements that we reviewed last time. The link on this slide is going to take you directly to the day one presentation if you happen to miss that or want to review it. Finally, a couple updates and reminders. About the same time of our day one meeting, the list of districts required to include specific LCAP goals based on dashboard data came out. So we addressed that in our last presentation, but that's just a reminder. Selected districts do have to include a specific goal, and that was in day one. And in addition, recently, there was a release of the Comprehensive Support and Improvement, or CSI school list, and that also triggers an additional response in the LCAP for those districts, and we discussed that also in day one. So just a reminder that those two lists are now available. We also wanted to clarify something that I think you've been hearing, and that is about a proposal in the budget trailer bill that is out right now. And one of the proposals in there includes language about a mid-year update, and we've had some questions about this. We just wanted to clarify. This is currently only a proposal. It's in proposed. It is not in legislation. It's in a proposed bill. If it becomes legislation, it would apply in the 23-24 school year. So you had that last year, that mid-year supplement, that's not required. We mentioned that last year. This is not required this year. If it does come to pass, passes through legislation, that would be next year. So those are just a couple updates. And now I'm going to turn it over to Debbie Kano, who's going to take a look at metrics and dig into that. Debbie?
Thank you, Bonnie. Good afternoon, everyone. As Bonnie said, in this section, we will go more in depth with the metrics section of the LCAP. And on this slide here, you can see we have multiple tools used in measurement. And we know that there are various ways to evaluate achievement and outcomes. In your LCAP, you may utilize both qualitative and quantitative data to measure progress towards your desired outcomes. Next slide, please. So here we see a screenshot from the LCAP template, which shows the measuring reporting results table that is embedded in the goals and actions section. For each LCAP year, LEAs must identify the metrics that they will use to track progress towards their expected outcomes. Additionally, the instructions state that LEAs are encouraged to identify metrics for specific student groups as appropriate, including expected outcomes that would reflect narrowing of any existing performance gaps. And for the 23-24 LCAP, LEAs are to complete the year 2 outcomes. The section for year 3 outcomes will not be completed this year. LEAs will need to use available state and local data and educational partner input for year 2 outcomes. Next slide, please. All state priorities must be addressed each year of the LCAP. Progress on state priorities is reflected through reporting in the LCAP of 24 different measures defined in Education Code section 52060. At a minimum, the LCAP must address all LCFF priorities and associated metrics. However, keep in mind that this is a minimum and there is no limit to the number of metrics an LEA may choose to use to measure progress in meeting goals and addressing priorities. Here we see state priorities separated by the 3 LCFF categories: conditions of learning, engagement, and student outcomes, along with the required metrics associated with each of the corresponding state priorities. All local indicators are shaded in pink, and state collected data are shaded in gray. For state priorities measured by local indicators, LEAs are encouraged to use metrics based on or reported through the relevant self-reflection tool for local indicators within the dashboard. As a reminder, LEAs are required to present the local indicators to the local governing board at the same meeting in which the LCAP is adopted. So the local indicator process should really inform the development of the LCAP. We've also included the link to the CDE's local indicator webpage where you can access the self-reflection tools for local indicators. Next slide, please. This slide highlights data that is traditionally available to LEAs through the dashboard, whether populated by the CDE or local indicator reporting. One thing to take note is that teachers is highlighted in priority 1, and we will discuss this further in the next slide. Next slide, please. So there are 3 specific aspects of priority 1. One is teachers being assigned and fully credentialed for the students that they teach. 2, students having access to standard aligned instructional materials. And the 3rd is schools' facilities are maintained in good repair. Presently, there have been no changes made to instructional materials or facilities portion of priority 1. However, in June of 2022, for the first time, the state published teaching assignment monitoring outcome data. And so what does that all mean for the reporting of the metric in the LCAP? Measuring and reporting of teacher data in the LCAP remains a local decision. Ed Code 52060D1 does not specify that the LEA include the same data in the LCAP as that which appears on the local indicator for priority 1, although significant differences might be called into question by educational partners. The teacher assignment data that will be used on the 22-23 dashboard will be from the 21-22 academic year. So we urge you to share this information with your teams and encourage you to share the changes and the new methods of reporting this data with your educational partners and your school board. Next slide, please. A question that might arise is if we've used local data for year 1 outcomes in the absence of dashboard data in the subsequent years, can we stop using the local data and switch to the CAS measures? Well, yes, you can, but you can revise and adjust the metrics to include dashboard CAS metrics when they become available. Just remember, if you reported data in year 1 outcomes, you should report in the year 2 outcomes the same measure and the same outcomes in order to demonstrate how you've monitored progress or identified needs. So you want to compare apples to apples. In the goal analysis, LEAs may assess the effectiveness of a single action or group of actions within the goal in the context performance on a single metric or group of specific metrics within the goal. And because of the flexibility offered to LEAs in the 2021 school year to administer a local assessment in lieu of CAS, many LEAs use local assessment data to fulfill the priority 4 metric on both 21-22 LCAP as well as 22-23 LCAP, since the approval deadline of the last LCAP preceded the release of the summative assessment results of CAS. So LEAs may choose to continue using these same local assessment results, and especially if they're connected to specific goals and actions in the LCAP. But this is a local decision. Ed Code requires only that LEAs report on statewide summative assessments. And now I'm going to hand over to Helen to finish up our metrics section. Helen?
Thank you, Debbie. So here's a screenshot of 2324 LCAP required metrics inventory tool that is available to support LEAs with the measuring and reporting results section of the LCAP. Thank you to Evan Vardelheim and Dr. Hilary Wiseman from the Data Assessment and Accountability Network, or DAN, for updating this resource. This tool includes a checklist of all required metrics specified in the ED code and identifies primary data sources, including state data report sites and available CalPATS reports. It also identifies additional considerations that might be important to clarify differences or nuances of certain measures. The link to the tool is on this slide. Next slide, please. This slide is a reminder that a significant student group is consistent of 30 or more students in dashboard accountability. However, for foster youth and homeless group, the significant subgroup is 15 or more students. In the next slide, we will share a resource for the 2022 dashboard report. Next slide, please. The San Bernardino County Office of Education shared with LACO's Accountability and Data Literacy Unit this tool that is available to our LACO school districts to pull their data similar to what is shown in this snapshot. School districts can pull data by their districts and by schools. The arrow up at the top is the link to access the school level data. This tool can help the districts to have a snapshot of performance bars on a single page. The link to this tool is on this slide. The tool is applicable for school districts only. Next slide, please. The metrics, baseline year one outcome, and the desired outcome section should have been completed in the 22-23 LCAP. And for the 23-24 LCAP, year two outcome should be completed. Per the LCAP instruction, the baseline data shall remain unchanged throughout the 3-year LCAP. And in addition, when completing the LCAP for the 23-24 school year, enter the most recent data available and indicate the school year to which the data applies. It is also recommended to include the data source for the metric to provide full transparency to your educational partners and the public. Please keep in mind that any changes to the metric or the desired outcomes that resulted from reflections on prior practice shall be explained in the goal analysis prompt 4. Next slide, please. So in this third year of the plan, you may also choose to have additional metrics. If so, here are some questions to consider when you're selecting metrics. Is it measurable? Do you have the data needed to calculate a baseline as well as measure progress? What methodology will you use to measure the metric? Is your methodology sound and replicable? And do you have interim measures available to measure progress? Next slide, please. The reporting of the metric outcomes is an essential part of the through line that we often refer to. Remember, LEAs are encouraged to identify metrics for specific student groups as appropriate that would reflect narrowing of any existing performance gaps. They help to tell the story of successes and challenges of implementation and the effectiveness of actions towards the goal. Metrics will provide educational partners a clearer picture of the progress towards the goal and provide data for the LEAs to reflect on the current LCAP and to develop next year's LCAP. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Adrienne for the goal analysis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to take a deeper look into the goal analysis part of the LCAP. The purpose of the goal analysis is to reflect on what you did, discover what you learned, and to make sure that it is clear to all your educational partners why you are adopting an action for the 23-24 LCAP, adapting, or abandoning an action. This reflection is also based on the goals, metrics, actions, and expenditures in your 22-23 LCAP. We want to point out in our LCAP timeline the winner section, which focuses on the LEA's process for goal analysis. Because the LCAP should not and cannot be developed in isolation, the timeline identifies providing training for your district LCAP team staff, including the program staff responsible for the LCAP implementation and the fiscal staff responsible for budget oversight. Your staff will provide the needed information to complete the goal analysis, the annual update tables, and the LCFF carryover table. The timeline intentionally supports the LEA to engage in a goal analysis process that provides multiple sources of data to support the local decision-making for what actions to continue to adopt, which actions to adapt or modify, and what actions to abandon in order to best address the current local needs. The goal analysis template has 4 prompts, which takes you through the cycle of inquiry. Simply stated, the goal analysis prompts ask you to think about it and then write about it. In prompt 1, it asks you to reflect on what was planned and what actually happened. In prompt 2, what was budgeted and what was actually spent. Prompt 3, how effective were the actions and what do the metrics and data tell you? And lastly, in prompt 4, what changes were or will be made after reflecting on this information, and what changes will be actually seen in the 23-24 LCAP. The next few slides are meant to be used as a tool. We have provided this as a separate PDF so that you may share this tool with your program and fiscal staff who will be providing you with the information needed for the goal analysis. You will see here the goal analysis prompts, the instructions in red font, and some guiding questions and helpful points to remember. As stated in our LCAP Training Day 1, the prompts are for the reader and the instructions are for the writers. In prompt 1, there are 4 components in the LCAP instructions. The first one is the description of the overall implementation of the actions. The response should be clear in describing what actually occurred and that connects to all the actions in the goal. The second and third components are the successes and challenges. Here are some possible successes, such as increased student participation in a service or program, and a possible challenge might be decreased student participation in a service or program. The last component in prompt 1 addresses whether there were any actions that were not implemented or were implemented in a substantively different way than was originally planned. So here are some possible differences that we've listed here and some possible reasons why this occurred. You'll also see here the next, which is prompt 2. Here you are explaining any material differences between the budgeted expenditures and the estimated actual expenditures, and, or if applicable, any planned percentage of improved services and estimated actual percentage of improved services. For this prompt, you will need to use the annual update table to find the information. Last year, prompt 3 seemed to be the prompt that gave many folks some difficulty. In prompt 3, the description is focused on the effectiveness of the actions in making progress towards the goal. Here you see many questions to consider when addressing this prompt. So you can see, are you describing the effectiveness of the action? Are there specific actions connected to progress in year 2, outcomes for all students, or specific student groups? Also, is there a mention of local data to measure progress and so forth? We also have included some key points to remember. The last prompt is prompt 4. This asks for the description of any changes made to the goal, the expected outcomes, metrics, or actions. Keep in mind that this is based, again, on the reflection of prior practice and the analysis of the goals and the data. The goal analysis is one of the components of the annual update. The metrics and the annual update tables provide your community with a clear picture of what has occurred this past year. It is here that you want your educational partners to walk away understanding how the district moved closer towards your goals. As we move into the increased or improved services section of the LCAP, The intent of this section is to demonstrate how the LEA is operationalizing equity for low-income, foster youth, and English learner students. I'm going to share what needs to occur within your process before you can complete this section of the LCAP. The process for designing actions can be seen here. After you have gathered and analyzed the data, you must identify the specific needs of your students and the underlying causes. This must be done before you can develop the strategies to address the needs. You must also identify how you will measure the effectiveness of the actions. And if your action is a contributing action, you will need to determine the scope of the action or service. As you begin the action planning process, it's important to gather and analyze both qualitative and quantitative data. The data you collect should not just be quantitative data, such as state assessments, local indicators, and local measures. You should also be gathering the qualitative data of your students. What are the needs, conditions, and circumstances of your students? The design of your actions should reflect the action planning process that you have in place. The balance of the qualitative and quantitative data is necessary and will determine what you're going to do. Just as I shared about the goal analysis, the process is very important and critical when designing actions. Again, this is not meant for one person to do this. Analyzing the data is done through root cause analysis, whereby the outcome of this process will allow you to address the problem rather than any symptom. This would take place during the needs assessment phase of the process. Identifying the needs, conditions, and circumstances of your students should occur after you have gathered and analyzed the data and before determining what actions and services you are going to provide to address the identified needs of your students. Your educational partners will be part of this process. This will allow them to understand the link between the qualitative and quantitative data and the planned actions in your LCAP. Lastly, if an action has been identified as a contributing action, it will be designed to meet a specific identified need of your low-income, foster youth, and/or English learner students. The scope of the action will have to be determined. In other words, who will be receiving the action or service? If it is a limited action, then the services will only be provided for low-income, foster youth, and/or English learner students. If it is an LEA-wide or school-wide action, the action will still address the specific identified need or needs of the unduplicated students, but the services will be provided for the low-income foster youth and English learner students, as well as non-UDP students who will receive services as well. So once you know the needs, conditions, and circumstances of your low-income students, foster youth, and English learners, and the specific needs within your community, you can begin developing strategies to address these identified needs. For contributing actions that have a scope of LEA-wide or school-wide, it must be based on specific identified needs of your unduplicated students. Oftentimes, this requirement is confusing, so we have compiled some research findings to help you understand this requirement. This is not meant as a menu for selection, but as a starting point in the process of identifying the needs, conditions, and circumstances of your students. Your students may have similar needs, or they may have very different needs than what is captured in these next 3 slides. So again, I'm going to say again, this is not meant for you to just, a menu to select. This is for you to wrap your head around potential needs, conditions, and circumstances of your low-income foster youth and English learners. So you can see some needs of low-income students, which could be academic support or lack of or parental support, financial constraints, the conditions of the student, perhaps circumstances might be homelessness or transportation issues or exposure to alcohol and drug abuse, violence and trauma. So again, this is framing the research findings in terms of what are some underlying causes to the needs, conditions, and circumstances of low-income students. For foster youth, the slide is also, and the research is organized in the same format. So you can see what are some needs of the foster youth students, what are some conditions of students in the foster care system, and what are some circumstances for the foster youth students. Respectively, the English learners, some needs of the English learners could be, again, lack of literacy instruction. The conditions might be students feeling anxiety, confusion, and isolation due to the language barrier, or circumstances. You know, you have academic language gaps. Your English learners might be an unaccompanied minor, which might be new to your school and the conditions that and the circumstances that exist for your English learners. When you design your actions, again, keep in mind the through line. This means looking at the common or consistent theme of your LCAP. This graphic points out that there must be forethought and intention, not only within your LCAP as a whole, but especially when you're designing your actions and your contributing actions. Looking at the successes and the identified need of your students alongside your educational partners will show the community how your LCAP is connected to the vision of success for your students. And now Jeannie will continue with the increased or improved services section.
Thank you, Adrienne. This afternoon, we take a closer look at the 3 required descriptions that will reflect the contributing actions the LEA developed in the goals and actions section. So for the first prompt, LEAs provide an explanation of how each contributing action that's being provided LEA-wide or on a school-wide basis is principally directed to and effective for the intended student group. For the second response, LEAs provide a description of how all the contributing actions in the LCAP included are increasing or improving services by the proportionality percentage required. And in the third prompt, LEAs with greater than 55% enrollment of unduplicated pupils will identify the actions they will provide using the additional concentration grant add-on funds to increase the number of staff who provide direct services to students at schools with a concentration of greater than 55% unduplicated count of foster youth, English learners, and low-income students. Next slide, please. We will look this afternoon at how the required descriptions in this section connect to the forethought and intention in planning contributing actions that are responsive to the unique needs, conditions, and circumstances of English learners, low-income, and foster students in the local community. The star on the slide identifies the action section in the plan to emphasize the action planning process that Adrienne just shared. The descriptions required in this section connect directly to the LEA's reflective, inclusive, and intentional planning process. Next slide, please. So taking a closer look at prompt 1. In prompt 1, LEAs explain how each contributing action that is being provided LEA-wide or on a school-wide basis is principally directed to and effective for the intended student group to achieve the outcomes measured in the LCAP goal. This visual breaks out the components required for these explanations. First, the LEA needs to explain how the LEA considered the needs, conditions, or circumstances of its unduplicated pupils. Next, how the action is based on and responsive to these considerations. And next, how the action is intended to help achieve an expected measurable outcome in the goal for the intended student group. Additionally, for an LEA-wide action where there is less than 55% enrollment of unduplicated pupils, or for school-wide actions where there's less than 40% enrollment of unduplicated pupils at the school or at the specific schools where an action is being provided school-wide, the response needs to also explain how the actions are the most effective use of the funds for the intended student groups. And this description must include alternatives considered, supporting research, experience, or educational theory that the LEA used to determine how this was the most effective use of the funds. Next slide, please. You may have already made the connection between the process steps for developing contributing actions that were shared previously and the 3 description components required to explain how a wide action is principally directed and effective. When the school-wide or LEA-wide contributing actions have been planned with forethought in response to what the LEA has learned about the relevant needs, conditions, and circumstances of the intended student group, and there is intentionality in how the action addresses these unique needs, and the outcomes that are expected are stated explicitly, the LEA can describe their action planning process to respond to prompt 1. Let's take a look to see the connection to the 3 components just discussed on the next slide. This visual connects the 3 components required for explaining how the wide action is principally directed towards and effective in meeting the LEA's goals for its unduplicated pupils, and the process steps just reviewed for designing contributing actions. On the next 2 slides, we use this frame to offer 2 examples of descriptions for LEA-wide and school-wide actions that explain how each is principally directed and effective for the intended student group to achieve the goals in the LCAP. Next slide, please. In this example, there is a description for a contributing action that addresses the needs of low-income students. The short title of the action is Wellness Center. Here, the description first explains the LEA considered that 1/3 of their students in poverty have faced 1 or more of 10 traumas that are measured by the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, and that the LEA learned from their outreach with low-income parents, students, and teachers that many of their low-income students and their families are struggling with trauma. And the description explains some of the challenges these students are facing in their community. In providing this information, the response explains the data used and the inputs from educational partners that informed an understanding of this group's needs, conditions, and circumstances. The next component addresses how the action is based on what the LEA learned about the trauma and challenges their low-income community faces. In response, the LEA plans to increase social workers at their wellness center to provide social and emotional support and to provide professional development to improve staff's understanding of trauma and how to improve learning environments that can be more safe and supportive to these students. Additionally, the description provides an expected outcome for the low-income students and explains how it will be measured. It explains the LEA will use student surveys to reflect an expected increase in the sense of safety and connectedness to supportive adults at their school. Next slide, please. Another example is provided on this slide, and this example speaks to 2 contributing school-wide actions that each address specific needs and circumstances for an LEA's low-income students at specific elementary schools. The example is offered to illustrate the three components for explaining how a school-wide action, and in this case, how two related actions are principally directed and effective for the intended student groups. Next slide, please. We're moving on to prompt 2 now. Prompt 2 connects to all of the contributing actions included in the actions table. These are LEA-wide, school-wide, and/or limited actions. Here, the LEA must describe how these actions together are expected to result in the proportional increase or improvement in services that was calculated for the total percentage to increase or improve services. We saw this total percentage at the top of the increased or improved services section in the fiscal summary. So here, consistent with the requirements of Title V, California Code of Regulations, Section 15496, the LCFF spending regulations, LEAs must describe how services provided for unduplicated pupils are increased quantitatively or improved qualitatively by at least the percentage calculated as compared to the services provided for all students in the LCAP year. To improve services means to grow services in quality. To increase services means to grow services in quantity. So services are increased or improved by the contributing actions, whether they are LEA-wide, school-wide, or provided on a limited basis to the intended student groups. From the response, it should be clear what is being provided that is additional and what is being provided to improve services for the target students. Next slide, please. Prompt 2 also added a new component last year to address any planned percentage of improved service if the LEA is including any contributing actions without funding on a limited basis. For these actions, the LEA needs to explain the methodology they used to determine the contribution of the action toward the proportional percentage. Per the instructions, a percentage of improved services needs to correspond to the amount of LCFF funds that the LEA estimates it would expend to implement the action if it were funded. For example, an LCAP may include a limited action for a foster youth student engagement plan that includes no funds because the personnel supporting the action are volunteers. In this case, the district would indicate their percentage calculated for the planned qualitative improvement. This would be based on the service provided on a limited basis and explained through the methodology that the LEA used to determine the percentage of qualitative improvement using their estimate of what the action would cost if it were funded. The instructions in the LCAP template provide a method for this calculation. Next slide, please. So this slide references prompt 2, and it offers a variety of approaches that the LEA may consider to describe how quantity of services are increased and how quality of services are improved through the collective implementation of all the contributing actions in the LCAP. For each of the approaches, the LEA would first identify the total percentage required to increase or improve services. With a student group approach, an LEA might explain how the quantity of services are increased and how quality of services being provided is improved for each of the 3 student groups. They might describe the additional service for each of the groups and then describe how services are better for each of the student groups. Another approach is for the LEA to explain quality and quantity of service by goal. With this approach, the response would explain what services are additional and how services are better for the targeted groups in each goal. This might include how a particular goal increases or improves services intentionally for one of the target student groups. And lastly, on the slide, a third approach focuses on types of actions by first referring the reader to the descriptions for LEA-wide or school-wide actions that were addressed in prompt 1. Then explaining how the limited actions in the plan provide more services for the intended student groups and or how these actions improve the quality of services being provided on a limited basis. With any of these approaches, the LEA would include the methodology for calculating any planned percentage of improvement for any actions that are included on a limited basis without LCFF funds, if any of these actions are included. Next slide, please. And now for prompt 3, the final prompt in the increased or improved services section. Prompt 3 addresses the specific actions planned to provide additional direct services to students at schools where enrollment is greater than 55% unduplicated students. This response connects to the LEA's process for designing contributing actions where additional staff will provide additional direct services to students at specific schools. Where all schools in the LEA have greater than 55% enrollment of unduplicated pupils, an LEA needs to explain the criteria they use to determine which schools will receive the additional staffing support. In situations such as in smaller LEAs, where the additional concentration grant add-on does not provide enough funding to increase staff for direct services, the LEA will need to describe how it is using these funds to retain staff, providing direct services to students at a school with enrollment of unduplicated pupils that is greater than 55%. When identifying the goal and action numbers for this response, it is important that the contributing actions noted are increasing the number of staff who are providing direct services to students at school sites with greater than 55% enrollment of unduplicated students. Next slide, please. And here we see the final item in the increased or improved services section. And this is the staff to student ratio table. This table only applies to LEAs receiving the concentration grant add-on funding that have comparison schools, where some of the schools have enrollment concentration of 55% or less unduplicated student counts, and some schools have student concentrations of greater than 55% enrollment of unduplicated students. Here, the staff to student ratio must be based on the FTE for staff providing direct services to students at schools and the number of enrolled students counted on the first Wednesday in October. So for this year, that would be October 2022. And it's also noted on the slide that an LEA may provide the ratios by grade span as applicable to the LEA. So if the conditions are met, all 4 of the boxes would be completed for this ratio table for eligible LEAs. And to finish out this section, we have one more slide. And this slide offers a caution to LEAs related to the additional 15% concentration grant funding provided for increasing the staff providing these additional direct services to students at the sites with the high enrollment of unduplicated students. This amount of funding is included in calculating the LEA's percentage to increase or improve services for the coming school year. And an LEA not meeting its required percentage to increase and improve services in a given year must calculate and carry over the unmet percentage to the following for the following school year. So it's important to emphasize that while the additional 15% concentration grant is not broken out from the LEA's carryover calculation, CDE has indicated that LEAs are expected to track this portion of funding in-house and are expected to ensure that any unused portion of the additional supplemental concentration grant is carried over and reassigned for the intended purpose the following year. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Business Advisory Services colleagues to take us into the action tables.
Thank you, Jeannie. Good afternoon. This is Hoyt Yi, one of the business services consultants here. Next slide, please. The starting point for the action tables is the data entry process. Now, depending on the system that you use, if it's LACO's LCAP system, the DocuTrack system, or CDE's LCAP template, the data entry process will vary. So you're going to have to refer to the instructions or user guides for the particular system that you use. Next slide. Regardless of the system that you use, the output or the action tables will essentially be and look the same. There are a total of 5 action tables. The first 2 action tables on the screen is for your 23-24 year, the LCAP year. All the information on these tables will be auto-populated from the data entry process. The remaining 3 tables are for the 22-23 annual update year. And most of the information will be auto-populated, but there will be some information that will need to be manually inputted. For example, the estimated actual expenditure numbers. Slide number 3, or the next slide, please. This is a picture of the data entry table for CDE's template. It provides a pretty good snapshot of the important information that needs to be entered. And keep in mind that the data entry process for the ELCAP and for doc tracking services is going to look somewhat different. Take a look at the green highlighted boxes on the top row. There you have the projected LCFF base grant, the projected LCFF supplemental and or concentration grants, and the projected percentage to increase or improve services for the coming year. You can get all this information from your FitMac calculator. If you go to the screenshot of the FitMac calculator below, on the summary tab of that Excel document, there is, if you look in rows 50, 51, 52, you'll have your base grant, which excludes the TIG and transportation add-ons, the S&C grant number for the particular year, and lastly, the percentage to increase or improve services. Make sure that the FitMac calculator that you're using is updated with the May revised projection factors. Going back up to the top row, the red highlighted box, that's your LCFF carryover percentage for the 22-23 year. And for those who are using the ELCAP system or doc tracking services, that percentage will be auto-populated from your current 22-23 LCAP. Next slide, please. 23-24 total planned expenditures table. This will all be auto-populated from the data entry. Next slide, please. the 23-24 contributing actions table, all the information here will also be auto-populated from the data entry. We included a screenshot of the FICMAT calculator, so you could double check your work to make sure that you've inputted the correct information. You may want to print out these slides so that when you are working on your action tables, that you can make sure that you're capturing the right information for the right year. So I would like to turn this over to my colleague, Dio Brocchi.
Thank you, Hoyt. Dio Brocchi here, BSc at LACO Business Advisory Services. Next slide, please. All right, the annual update table. This gives districts an opportunity to give a dollar metric against each action and goal that was present in the 22-23 LCAP. As you can see on the far right there is a point of entry, and so that is registered in the green there, and we want to be sure to remind districts that this needs to be an annual number. We are aware that you're preparing this update perhaps 3 quarters through the year, but that number needs to be an annual number. Also, be sure to check your goals and actions to ensure that they are replicated based on the goals and actions in the 22-23 LCAP. Next slide, please. The contributing actions annual update table, there's 2 points of entry there as well. As Hoyt mentioned earlier, we are referencing the FICMAT calculator. Again, this would be though for the 22-23 year, and you have to update your estimated actual supplemental concentrations grant amount. Likewise, you also have to enter again the annual estimated actual costs for each of those goals and actions. And this table is focused on the contributing actions. Next slide, please. The LCFF carryover table, the vast majority of this is auto-calculated, but the first box there also requires a manual input, which is the estimated actual LCFF base grant amount. Again, we want to remind districts to use the calculator based on the May revise, and it also includes your 22-23 P2 actual ADA data. I'd now like to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Belinda Martinez Garcia, and she'll talk in further detail about the budget overview for parents.
Thank you, Dio. And to all of our participants on the call, hang in there. We're almost at the LCAP finish line. Budget overview for parents. To preface, this document is typically completed towards the end of the LCAP process and after your LEA's budget forms for the coming year have been finalized. Next slide, please. A little bit of background. The budget overview for parents is mandated by Ed Code, and the requirement is that it be developed in conjunction with the LCAP. It must be attached as the cover page to the LCAP, included in the review and approval process, and it should also be prominently posted on your LEA's website. As an important note, this document is not electronically linked to any LCAP e-template platform. It continues to be a separate Microsoft Excel workbook template that's provided by CDE, and it'll have to be uploaded as part of the LCAP submission. Next slide, please. So the template was last updated by CDE a few months ago in November of 22 to be exact, and you can download that version from the CDE webpage noted on this slide. Some good news, the components of the template remains the same as last year. It still consists of 6 tabs with the requirement of only having to submit the template tab. Next slide, please. So here's an image of what that template tab looks like after you've entered all of the required information. Basically, the budget overview for parents ends up being a 3-page summary document that provides budget information and fiscal transparency for parents and your entire school community. Next slide, please. So most of the information you just viewed on the template tab will come from, like I mentioned, your entries on the data input tab. And here's an image of what that tab looks like, although we went ahead and annotated it for you to make it a bit easier for you to complete. We've also provided this annotated version in a much larger one-page reference document as part of today's training materials. So as I previously mentioned, the template hasn't changed. It's still organized in the same color-coded scheme as last year. In the top blue section, you'll enter your complete LEA's name, your CDS code, the LEA contact that's specific to the budget overview for parents, along with their telephone number and email address. It's not either or. You want to make sure that you include both telephone number and email address for that contact. The yellow and peach sections, or as someone told me, goldenrod and salmon color, that is a breakdown of your LEA's projected revenues and expenditures, respectively, for the 23-24 coming LCAP year. And lastly, the green section pertains to the LEA's 22-23 budgeted and actual expenditures for high needs students only. Very important. Before you start entering information in the data input tab, you'll want to make sure to have all of the documents that are there listed to the right of the slide. And you also want to make sure that they are your final versions, because they will be your primary source of information. And I know that Dio, my colleague Dio and Hoyt previously mentioned and emphasized, we want to make sure that those calculations are the final calculations. So now we're going to go ahead and piecemeal this tab and provide you with a general crosswalk for each section. Next slide, please. So starting with the 23-24 projected revenue section, the yellow section, most of the amounts you'll need to enter here will come from your LEA's 23-24 adopted budget form 1. On this form, you'll find your LEA's projected total LCFF revenue amount, along with totals for your state, local, and federal revenues. Except for your LCFF supplemental and concentration grant, that amount will come from the FCMAT LCFF calculator. So we've included snapshots of both Form 1 and the FCMAT LCFF calculator with the letter that corresponds to each annotated line in this section. Next slide, please. Now, the peach section identifies the budgeted expenditures for the coming year, 23-24, and that would include your total general fund expenditures and those that are specific to your LCAP actions and high needs students. Then based on your entries, the template will auto-calculate the general fund expenditure total that are not that's not included in the LCAP. Again, we've included a snapshot of each form that captures the totals you'll have to enter. Those forms include your Form 1, the 23-24 total plan expenditures table, and the 23-24 contributing actions table. This time we included numbers 1, 2, and 3 on each snapshot that corresponds to each annotated line in the section above. I do want to point out that for the first entry, your total budgeted general fund with number 1 expenditures line, this total should also include the amounts under transfers out and other uses in Form 1 in order to ensure full transparency. And so we boxed those sections in red on the Form 1 snapshot on the bottom left for your reference. Next slide, please. Finally, the green section identifies your current year's budgeted and actual expenditures for high needs students. So you'll need your guessed it, your 22-23 contributing actions annual update table to identify the amount that was planned for contributing expenditures and then the actual estimated expenditures for those actions. Again, we've included a snapshot of the table with numbers 1 and 2 that correspond to each annotated line in the green section above. So after you complete the green section, you will have completed the entire data input tab. Now, as a side note, although you don't have to upload or include the data input tab as part of your LCAP, Your assigned BSc here at LACO may request a copy of this tab for review purposes only. So please make sure to save your final file and have it readily available when requested. So now we're ready to move to the next tab, which is, next slide, please, your narrative response tab. So for this tab, please make sure to review the instructions carefully. We're not going to go over the section in detail, but in summary, you'll have to provide a response of no more than 75 words for each prompt as applicable. There are a total of 3. 1 is required and the other 2 are conditional depending on the information that is entered in the data input tab. So again, please make sure to review the instructions and reach out if you need further assistance. Next slide, please. So finally, we made it to the template tab. And so we started with this tab and we're ending with this tab because this is, as a reminder, the tab that is the only document that should be included as part of your 23-24 LCAP. And don't forget that it must be the cover of your LCAP and be reviewed and approved by your board in conjunction with the rest of your plan. Next slide, please. So we know each LEA is different regarding how the LCAP is prepared. So for any program staff needing additional references to the fiscally related terms we mentioned and emphasized, and I know we threw many out there, we've included the definitions here to assist you in the process. Next slide, please. Here are a few more definitions for you to reference. But in closing, and I know we mentioned this on day 1 of this LCAP training series, but it's worth mentioning again, the collaboration between the program and fiscal staff at the district level is critical to ensure that accurate information is being reported. Most of us already know that the LCAP and fiscal reporting timelines don't always align. So again, constant communication and collaboration are key in this process. And with that, I will turn the presentation back over to our ASM team.
Thank you, Belinda. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. In this next section, we will review the timeline for LCAP development and the approval process. Next slide, please. As we know, there are many components to the development of the LCAP, which begin in the fall and move through the rest of the school year. To support your planning of the LCAP development process, we put together and shared a 22-23 timeline. The link to the document is provided on this slide as well. Currently, we are in the winter and spring season of the development phase, as noted on this slide. These screenshots here serve as a reminder that the development of an LCAP is a process that takes time, it takes planning, reflection, and it involves your educational partners. The intent of this document here is to offer you a guide with steps to take, key processes to implement, and reflective questions to consider so that your LCAP is comprehensive, meaningful, and compliant. This will ensure that opportunities and outcomes are improved for all students and that your LCAP is approved by the superintendent of schools without delay. Next slide. As noted on this slide here, the beginning of the school year between August and November was the time to get reacquainted with local indicators, the self-reflection tools, and to determine who is responsible for what. December through April, LEAs continue to collect evidence from local indicators. Most recently, we've all been analyzing our dashboard data. Nonetheless, this slide serves as a reminder that local indicators also offer noteworthy information for an LEA. Oftentimes, the data that we gather from our local indicators and our educational partners, such as our students, staff, and parents, are more timely, relevant, and introspective. These results provide opportunities to influence the actions and services we plan for in this upcoming LCAP. It is also important for LEAs to connect the local indicator process with the LCAP development process. The important task in the cycle of continuous improvement will be to analyze the data, determine needs of students and staff, and then plan actions and services accordingly for this upcoming school year. LEAs will adopt, adapt, or abandon actions and services as part of the PDSA cycle. Moving forward on this timeline, between May and June, but no later than the 1st of July, LEAs will report results of local indicators to their local governing board or body as a non-consent agenda item. This will be at the same meeting where the 23-24 LCAP and budget will be presented to the LEA's governing board or governing body for adoption. And finally, last on this timeline, on or before September 30th, the LEA will report the results of the local indicators to the dashboard. Next slide, please. Once the LCAP has been developed with all the required components, including consultation with educational partners and the SELPA, there are required steps LEAs must adhere to leading up to the submission of the adopted LCAP to the County Office of Education. And here are the steps. First, the superintendent shall present the 23-24 LCAP draft to the Parent Advisory Committee for review and an opportunity for them to comment on the draft. The 23-24 LCAP draft is also presented to the LEA's English Learner Parent Advisory Committee as applicable for review and comments as well. Then the superintendent will respond to all comments from the PAC and the EL PAC in written form. Moving forward, the LEA will notify its members of the public and its community of the opportunity to view the LCAP draft and submit written comments regarding the expenditures and actions in the LCAP. Next slide. Continuing on, the superintendent will review school plans as applicable to ensure that strategies and actions in the SIPSAs are consistent with the 23-24 LCAP draft. Once these steps have been completed, you're in the home stretch. LEAs will then hold at least one public hearing of the 23-24 LCAP in order to solicit recommendations and comments from the public regarding specific actions and expenditures proposed in the LCAP. This public hearing will be on the same day as the public hearing for the proposed 23-24 budget. And lastly, at a public meeting held after, but not on the same day as the public hearing, the governing board or body of the LEA shall adopt the LCAP and the budget for the 23-24 school year. In addition, local indicator results will be presented to the governing board or governing body as a non-consent item at this same meeting. Next slide. Now that your LCAP is adopted, you enter the approval phase. Statute provides the requirements and timeline for LCAP approval. As previously mentioned, the LCAP must be adopted by the local governing board on or before July 1st. Within 5 calendar days of adoption, which does include weekends and holidays, submit the adopted LCAP to LACO via the eLCAP system. It is at this time that the formal review and approval process begins for school districts. Between the time the LCAP is officially submitted and through the end of July, LCAPs are thoroughly reviewed. If necessary, on or before August 15th, the County Office of Education will request in writing clarification of contents of a school district's LCAP. Within 15 days of receipt of this clarification letter, the district shall respond in writing to the County Office of Ed regarding these requests. Within 15 days of receiving the response from the district, the County Office of Education may provide recommendations in writing for amendments to the LCAP. The district must then consider the recommendations in a public meeting within 15 days of receiving them from the County Office of Ed. If a school district's LCAP and budget are approved by the County Office of Education by the end of August or early September, an approval letter will be sent to the governing board of a school district on or before September 15th. It is important to note that a district's budget cannot be approved until the LCAP is approved. The deadline for the county office to approve the LCAP is October 8th. Next slide, please. When reviewing the LCAP, there are 4 criteria that must be met for approval. 1, the LEA has adhered to the State Board of Education adopted template and has followed the instructions for completing the template. 2, the LEA budget for the upcoming fiscal year includes expenditures that are sufficient to implement the actions in the LCAP. 3, the LEA has demonstrated how it is meeting its requirement to increase or improve services for students who are low income, English learners, or foster youth. And finally, the LEA has made the required calculations to determine whether there is a carryover requirement in supplemental and concentration funds for unduplicated pupils and describes planned uses in the LCAP. Next slide. The pre-review process offers school districts an opportunity to ensure their LCAP team is on track to address all legal requirements in the LCAP prior to board adoption. We appreciate the positive feedback we received about the pre-review process from last year. Thank you, everyone. And thus, once again, we will offer the opportunity for school districts to participate in a pre-review process before official LCAP submission. LCAP reviewers will be reaching out to each of their respective school districts via email sometime before April. This closes out the timeline information. Rachel has the next section.
Thank you, Anita, and good afternoon, everyone. We are in the home stretch of our presentation now, so thank you all for hanging in there. In this next section, we're going to take a look at the LCAP submission process for LEAs in LA County. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, all districts and charter schools in LA County will submit their 23-24 LCAP using LACO's eLCAP system. And as Anita noted in the previous section, it must be submitted within 5 days of adoption. If your LEA uses a third-party vendor such as DTS to develop your LCAP, then you will just upload and submit a PDF of your complete LCAP to LACO through the eLCAP system. And so the complete LCAP includes the budget overview for parents, the 23-24 LCAP, the action tables, and the LCAP instructions. And the PDF should be uploaded as one single file with all of those components included in that specific order. Next slide, please. So here we just wanted to provide a quick overview of the steps to upload a PDF of your complete LCAP for non-eLCAP users. And we've also included these instructions with today's materials. So first, you would need to log into the eLCAP system, or if you don't already have an account, then you would need to register as a new user at elcap.laco.edu. Once you're logged into the system, you'll click on Manage Plans, which is located on the left menu bar under LCAP. Then on the next screen, you'll select the orange button that says Add New Plan, as you can see on the slide in step 3. Next slide, please. So once you add a new plan, this title page will pop up. You'll need to complete the required fields on this page, which includes the plan title and year, the date of adoption, the LEA type and name, as well as the LEA contact information. For the plan year, be sure to select 2023-24. At the bottom of the title page, you can see where you will upload the PDF file of your complete LCAP. Now, the system will only allow you to upload one file, so be sure that all of the LCAP components are included and in the correct order as mentioned on the previous slide. Next slide, please. So at the bottom of the title page, you will need to click on the box that says, do you want to use the PDF plan upload? And doing this will allow you to choose your file to upload. Once you've selected your file, then you'll click on the green cloud button to upload the file. And then once the upload has completed, you'll see that the file name will replace the Choose File button. And then you will need to be sure to click the Save button. The final step, which you can see in step 6, is to officially submit the plan. So next you would go back to the plan index where you will see an orange submit button at the top of the screen. You will then click this button to officially submit the plan to LACO. Next slide, please. So this last section of today's workshop is only applicable to those LEAs that use the LCAP system to develop their plan. So if you don't use our LCAP system, then this section will not apply. And so in this section, we're going to provide a brief overview of the LCAP system, including how to roll over your plan. Next slide, please. So for those LEAs that use the LCAP system to develop the LCAP, we're happy to announce that you can now roll over your 22-23 plan into the 23-24 template. The components that will roll over include the metrics, baseline data, year 1 outcomes, and desired outcomes from the measuring and reporting results section. Also, the goals and actions section, which includes the goal description and explanation, the action titles, action descriptions, student groups, whether or not it's a contributing action, the scope and location if it is contributing, and then also the information that's required for the annual update table, the contributing actions annual update table, and the LCFF carryover table. Next slide, please. So these next few slides provide a quick overview of the steps to roll over the plan for those LEAs that use the LCAP system to develop their 22-23 LCAP. So first, you would need to log into the LCAP system, or if you don't already have an account, then you would need to register as a new user. If you're a new user, you will also need to be added as a user to the approved 22-23 plan in order to complete the rollover process. If there is not someone in your district who can add you to the approved 22-23 plan, so for example, if someone left and they were the only one with access to that plan, then you can contact your LCAP coordinator for assistance with this process. Once you're in the system, you'll click on Manage Plans on the left menu bar under LCAP. And then the next step is to select the approved 2022-23 plan. So what you see on this screen will vary by user, depending on how many drafts were created in the LCAP system. But you should only see one approved plan for the 2022-23 year. And you can confirm this by the third column, which indicates the plan year, and then also the last column, which shows the status. Next slide, please. So once you've selected the approved 2022-23 plan, you will see this screen that shows the plan index of your 22-23 LCAP. At the top of the screen, you will see the rollover button. And so you would just need to click this button to roll over the plan. After doing so, you should also see a message in green stating that the plan rolled over successfully. Next slide, please. You will then need to go back to the Manage Plans section to find the rolled over plan. And again, you can find the Manage Plans tab on the left menu bar. In the Manage Plans section, the rolled over plan will have the word rollover and the date of the rollover in the plan title. And you'll see that the status will now be draft, as you can see in the sample on the screen. You can edit this plan title to remove the word rollover and also the rollover date by going to the title page section in the plan index. Next slide, please. Once you click on the rolled over plan, you will see the plan index as shown here in this screenshot. The plan index features all of the sections of the LCAP and allows you to navigate through the various sections as you're developing the plan. So you will need to go into each section to enter the information that was not rolled over. There are also some sections in the plan index which you can see have the word preview. These sections are read-only and allow you to preview certain sections of the plan, such as the goals, the data entry table, and the action tables. The data for the preview sections is actually entered in the data entry for actions tables and the data entry for goals, actions, and budget sections. All of the features of the LCAP system are the same as last year, as the template did not change. However, there are a few components that were new last year, and we'll be taking a quick look at those components as a refresher. Next slide, please. So in the plan index, you will see a link to the budget overview for parents upload. The budget overview for parents, also called the BOP, is part of the LCAP, but it is not completed within the LCAP system. The BOP will be completed using the CDE template and then will need to be uploaded to the LCAP system. As a reminder, you will need to convert the template tab of the budget overview for parents into a PDF prior to uploading. So to upload a PDF file, you would just click on the Choose File button to select the PDF. Then you would need to click on the green cloud button to upload the file. A pop-up will then appear that shows the progress of the upload. And then once the upload completes, the file name will replace the Choose File button, as you can see in the screenshot. Next slide, please. Here we see a screenshot of the data entry for action tables section. This was one of the new components that was added last year and is where LEAs will enter the data for the annual update table, the contributing actions annual update table, and the LCFF carryover table. So when you click on this section, you will see 3 tabs across the top of the page, one for each of the 22-23 tables that require data entry. Now, most of the data in these tables is either rolled over from the 22-23 plan or auto-populated based on data entered. However, there are a few fields where data needs to be entered, which we'll take a look at in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So the first tab is the 22-23 annual update table. And on this page, you will see all of the actions that were included in the 22-23 LCAP, as well as the total planned expenditures for each action. So this is where you will enter the estimated actual expenditures for each action. So you would just click on the pencil icon to enter an amount, and then click on the save icon after entering each amount. As you enter and save the estimated actual expenditures for each action, you'll see that the amount will be added to the total amount at the top of the screen. And then again, just as a reminder, the estimated actual expenditures that need to be entered are as of June 30th, 2023. Next slide, please. The next tab is the 22-23 Contributing Actions Annual Update Table. And on this page, you will see all of the contributing actions that were included in the 22-23 plan. So here is where you'll enter the estimated actual LCFF supplemental and/or concentration grant amount for the 22-23 year. Also, the estimated actual expenditures of LCFF funds for each contributing action included in the 22-23 LCAP. And then, if applicable, the estimated actual percentage of improved services. So again, to enter these amounts, you'll just click on the pencil icon to open the fields, and then be sure to click on the save icon after entering each amount. Now, one thing to remember is that for the estimated actual expenditure amount for each contributing action, it's only asking for LCFF funds here. So for example, if you have a contributing action that includes LCFF funds and another funding source, such as federal funds, you can only include the LCFF funds here. Another thing to note is that for the estimated actual percentage of improved services, you will only be able to enter a percentage if the estimated actual expenditures for the action is $0. The system will not allow you to enter a percentage if there is a dollar amount over 0. And then lastly, the other fields shown in the table are either auto-populated from the 22-23 LCAP or auto-calculated based on the data entered. Next slide, please. So the third tab is for the 22-23 LCFF carryover table. And this table will calculate the LCFF carryover, if any, that will be required to be carried over from the 22-23 LCAP year into the 23-24 LCAP. Most of the information in this table is auto-populated or auto-calculated. However, there's one field that LEAs will need to input. So LEAs will need to enter the estimated actual LCFF base grant dollar amount. And remember, this is the total amount of LCFF funding the LEA estimates it will receive for the current school year, excluding the supplemental and concentration grants and add-ons for the Targeted Instructional Improvement Grant Program and the Home to School Transportation Program. And so again, to enter this amount, you would just click on the pencil icon to open the field, and then be sure to click Save, the Save icon after entering the amount. Next slide, please. So here we see a screenshot of the data entry for goals, actions, and budget, which includes the data entry tabs for the goals, the measuring and reporting results section, the actions, goal analysis, and budget summary. Now, we're not going to be looking at all of these data entry tabs at this time, since the data entry for these components have not changed from last year. But on this slide, you can see a screenshot of the goal analysis section. So this section will include 4 prompts that need to be completed for each goal that the LEA has in the LCAP. And so LEAs will just select the specific goal from the dropdown, and then it will display the 4 prompts for that specific goal. So this is something that will not be rolled over, as the goal analysis should be completed each year as the LEA reflects on its implementation and effectiveness of goals and actions through the annual update process. Next slide, please. So here we see the budget summary tab, which is also part of the data entry for goals, action, and budget. This table was added last year to the budget summary tab, and this is where LEAs will enter the projected LCFF base grant for the 2023-24 and projected LCFF supplemental and/or concentration grants amount for 2023-24. The third line, which is the projected percentage to increase or improve services for the coming school year, will be auto-calculated based on the first 2 amounts that are entered. And then these 3 amounts will also be displayed in the action tables. And although not included on this slide, this section also includes a view-only summary of the actions and funds included in the plan. Next slide, please. So here we see a screenshot of part of the increased or improved services section. The fields shown on the slide have not changed from last year. So for these fields that are shown on the slide, there is only one that requires data entry. So LEAs will need to enter the projected additional LCFF concentration grant amount for the 2023-24 school year. So this 15% concentration grant add-on field was new to the template last year. The other fields shown here on the slide will not need to be entered. These fields will be automatically populated from the data entered in other sections of the ELCAP, such as the budget summary section and the LCFF carryover table. And then in addition to the fields on the slide, the increased or improved services section also includes the 3 prompts that LEAs must respond to, as well as the staff to student ratio table. Next slide, please. So when the plan has been completed and adopted by the local governing board, LEAs will officially submit the plan to LACO by clicking on the orange submit button at the top of the screen in the plan index section. After the plan is submitted, the status in ELCAP will change from draft to submitted. Your superintendent will then receive an email request to authorize the submission of the plan. Once the superintendent authorizes the submission, the status will change to authorized, and then the formal review process will begin. As a reminder for pre-reviews, please do not submit the plan in ELCAP. Instead, email the PDF of the draft plan to your assigned LCAP coordinator. And you can download a PDF of the plan by clicking on the download PDF button located in the plan index. And then just as another note, the pre-review process is for school districts only. Next slide, please. So here we see a screenshot of the ELCAP user guide. And so this user guide is intended to provide a quick overview of the features and functionality of the ELCAP system. It is posted with today's materials, but you can also access it in the ELCAP system. So to access this guide in the system, you would just click on LCAP instructions in the left menu bar. This will take you to the LCAP resource files screen, where you can access the user guide, as well as the CDE LCAP instructions. In addition to the user's guide, it's important to also reference the CDE LCAP template instructions to ensure that you're fully addressing the LCAP requirements and the prompts. So remember, the prompts are for the readers and the instructions are for the LCAP writers. So if you're just responding to the prompts on the screen in the ELCAP system and not referring to the actual instructions, you may not be addressing all that's required for the prompts. Next slide, please. Okay, so that concludes our workshop. A big thank you to our partners in Business Advisory Services for sharing all of the great information on the action tables and budget overview for parents. And also a thank you all for joining us today. If there are any additional questions, please leave them in the chat and we'll get the Q&A out to you as soon as possible with responses. And we've also included our contact information on the next slides in case you need to reach out with any additional questions. So again, thank you all for joining us today.